I'm Oleg Novak, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Alfa Romeo Tonale. But it is not just any Alfa Romeo Tonale, because this is the Tonale Veloce Plug-In Hybrid Electric Q4. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but what it essentially means is that this is the third variant to launch in the Tonale small SUV range. It's the range-topping variant, it's the most expensive variant, and importantly, it is Alfa Romeo's first ever plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Now, the Tonale plug-in hybrid comes at a really crucially important and symbolic moment for Alfa Romeo, as it transitions from over 100 years of making internal combustion powered vehicles to a full EV lineup by 2027. So this Tonale is quite interesting because it kind of straddles the middle ground in that transition. We've just been able to drive the Tonale plug-in hybrid on Australian roads, so today is all about figuring out how it handles these Australian conditions. Not only that, but also we've taken it on a bit of a range test to see how far we can get on the electric motors alone. So stay tuned to find out if the Alfa Romeo Tonale nails the brief for their first ever plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Before we do that, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell below. The importance of the Alfa Romeo Tonale can't be understated, not only in terms of that transition to electrification, but also in terms of sales in Australia as the brand's first ever C-segment small SUV, a crucially important segment in driving sales volume. Back in 2022, Alfa Romeo delivered their lowest ever sales result here in Australia since the turn of the century. In 2023, their sales actually went up, and that's largely as a result of the Alfa Romeo Tonale launching. So it's a very important vehicle for the brand to get right in Australia. Now, all Alfa Romeo Tonales ride on a modified version of the same platform that underpins other Stellantis vehicles like the Jeep Compass and the Fiat 500X. What that means for this small SUV is that it's also front-wheel drive first. So another key element for this Tonale plug-in hybrid to get right is whether it can inject some of that Alfa Romeo dynamism that vehicles like the rear-wheel drive platformed Alfa Romeo Giulia and Stelvio are also famed for. So let's find out if it does that. The Alfa Romeo Tonale comes in three model grades in Australia. There is the TI entry grade variant, which retails at just over $50,000 before on-road costs. Stepping up to the mid-spec Veloce hybrid, that'll cost you just over $58,000. And then there is a very hefty price jump to just over $78,000 for this, the plug-in hybrid variant. The particular model we've got here today costs just under $82,000, and that's because of two options that we've got on the car that we've got with us today. So a very hefty price jump, and a big part of today is to determine whether the plug-in hybrid is actually worth it over those lower spec hybrid variants. A crucial element for any Alfa Romeo is the exterior design. And I kind of feel for the designers of Alfa Romeo because it's such a storied brand with over 100 years of always being famed for delivering really striking, beautiful designs in their cars. So now they have to navigate not only making electric vehicles, but also making SUVs. And there's a bit of a sea of sameness in that segment. So has Alfa Romeo delivered a design that has those Alfa Romeo-esque qualities, but also nails the SUV brief? Well, overall, I reckon that it looks pretty good. There's maybe some angles where the proportions make it look slightly long and thin, but overall I think it's a really striking design that is elevated slightly over that sea of sameness in the SUV market. You've also got a lot of elements here that are characteristically striking Alfa Romeo elements, and that includes things like the Scudetto grille, which is there on the front. You've also got these striking headlights over here that are apparently inspired by the Alfa Romeo SZ and RZ coupes of the 90s. So with the telephone dial wheels that we've got on this variant here, we've got it optioned with the 20-inch wheels. So the Veloce actually comes in standard form with 19-inch wheels. We've got the option that increases the price of this vehicle of the 20-inch wheels. They're finished in a grey finish as well, so that makes it look quite striking. Behind them, we've also got those big red Brembo brake calipers, which definitely increases the street curbside appeal of this vehicle. And there's also a few other little Easter eggs on the exterior design as well. So here on the exterior mirrors, you've got some Italian flags to remind you that you are indeed driving an Alfa Romeo, just in case you forgot. And also over here, my favorite little feature is that you have the traditional Alfa Romeo serpent that features in the Alfa Romeo logo. You've got that featured over here, except instead of in the logo where the serpent features consuming a man, we won't go into the backstory of that, you've got the serpent, but its head has been replaced by a charging cable connection. So Alfa Romeo clearly embracing its electric future. So what are some of the key features you get on the Tonale? Well, all Tonales are equipped with features like automatic full LED matrix headlights, a 10.25-inch touchscreen media display, 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, as well as wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and Alpha Connect services. Stepping up to the Veloce scores you the red Brembo brake calipers, aluminium paddle shifters, pedals and door sills, and Alfa's active dual-stage valve suspension. Then stepping up again to the Veloce Plug-In Hybrid scores additional features like perforated black leather seats, 8-way electric driver and passenger seats with driver memory, heated and ventilated front seats, a 14-speaker Harman Kardon sound system, and sunroof. But apart from the wheels and the premium paint, there are no further options that you can get on the plug-in hybrid Tonale. So really, this is the version, despite its expense, that comes with all of the Italian fruit that there is available. So how safe is it? The plug-in hybrid is unrated by ANCAP, but the lower grade non-plug-in hybrid variants have a 5-star crash safety rating. The Tonale also comes equipped with features like 6 airbags, autonomous emergency braking, traffic sign recognition, lane departure warning and lane keep assist, front and rear parking sensors, active blind spot assist with rear cross traffic alert, adaptive cruise control with stop go, and a 360-degree camera with dynamic lines. Hopping inside an Alfa Romeo interior, just like the exterior, you do want it to feel a bit special. So how does the Tonale plug-in hybrid go in that regard? Well, you'll be happy to know that there are some of those key Alfa Romeo qualities and features that do make you feel like you're in something a bit special and definitely an Alfa Romeo. The first one of those is the steering wheel, which is very familiar Alfa Romeo style, the 3-spoke steering wheel that you've got here. And importantly, you've got the push button start on the steering wheel, another key Alfa Romeo feature that you'd recognize from other variants. As well as that, you have the aluminium paddle shifters, which are in true Alfa Romeo fashion mounted to the steering column instead of the wheel. So they're really beautiful as well. So overall, it's a really nice Alfa Romeo-esque cabin ambience. One of my favorite features is the customizable digital instrument cluster over here, which you can set between 3 different modes. My personal favorite is the 60s heritage retro-inspired analog style display that harks back to Alfa Romeos of the 60s, which I think is really cool. You can also go with more minimalistic displays and more modern displays as well if you prefer. So apart from those key Alfa Romeo-esque qualities, what's the rest of the cabin like? Well, I think there's a few things that I really like and a few things that I don't like so much. So let's cover the things that I like about the cabin first. And I think there's some of the basics that I think the Alfa Romeo Tonale gets quite right. The seats, they're quite comfortable. Given the amount of adjustability you have, it's really easy to find a good driving position and you've got nice, good forward visibility. Although rear visibility, not quite as good, though it's helped by the 360-degree rear view camera. The next thing that I do appreciate about the car is that they haven't buried all of the functions behind a media display screen. So you've got all these buttons over here, which is great. Not only do you have some nice tactility there, but you can just easily switch through the aircon controls with the seamless touch of a tangible button, as opposed to having to hunt through different menu settings for something that's actually quite quick to do. So I commend Alfa Romeo in that regard. As well as that, I also appreciate that they've gone with a 10.25-inch media display. So it doesn't dominate the cabin. It's not too big. Alfa Romeos, traditionally, you know, their marketing, it's all about the driving. So I like the fact that they haven't mounted a big iPad over here. And I think the 10.25-inch screen is definitely plenty enough for what it intends to do as well. In terms of some of the areas that I don't quite like, well, for example here, I've gotten used to it now because I know how to do it. There's a little section here for your phone, a wireless charging pad. If you've got a big phone like this iPhone over here, it's sometimes just a bit awkward to get it in, just given the angle. It's really the only place you can put your phone because you've got some cup holders over here. So that's just something to be conscious of. But otherwise, there is a good space for your phone there if you can get it in. Apart from that, this is probably nitpicking slightly, but depending on your body height, if you've got long legs like I do here, I found that the side wall there in the driver footwell meant that my left foot was on long journeys always kind of slightly angled to the right. It would have been nice if there was a bit more space between the footrest and the side wall so that I could actually just have it relaxed a bit more. That is nitpicking though, because otherwise ergonomically it's a pretty sound cabin that's easy to get comfortable in and feels very natural as well. Next, this is a bit of a contradiction given I just said that I really like the 10.25-inch size media screen, and while that is certainly the case, I do feel some of the graphics inside it could have potentially been maximized a bit more in terms of the space they've got available. So for example, if you're in Apple CarPlay or other modes, sometimes the icons are a bit small. So if you're vision impaired, then it might be a bit harder to see them. I think they could have maybe maximized what they've done with the space a bit. For example, I don't just wear these glasses to look smarter, so that would be something that would be good to potentially improve. Otherwise, I found once I got used to it that the media system worked quite well and was reasonably intuitive and not too laggy in the time that I had the vehicle. And the last point that I think could be improved is in terms of the cabin materials. Overall, it's a relatively nice cabin ambience, and those main things like the steering wheel and the dials definitely do give it that nice touch, as well as the overall layout. But in terms of the cabin plastics, particularly in the lower areas, down here on the doors, but also in particular here on the center console, this feels really scratchy and plasticky. And for a vehicle that costs over $80,000, you'd probably expect it to have a bit more heft and bank vault-like solidity to the materials that are used. So that's just something that feels a bit cheap. So Alfa Romeos, they are traditionally all about the driver and their dynamics, but they can't rely on that, nor just being beautiful on the outside. This is a small C-segment SUV, so it needs to do the practicality thing really well. And for rear seat passengers, it's actually pretty good. So you can see me here in the rear seat. Now I'm 6 foot tall and I've got really adequate leg room. Toe room is also good. Perhaps it would be nice to have a bit more under thigh support, but the seats are actually pretty comfortable. Where it is lacking for me is potentially in the headroom. So again, at 6 foot, my hair you can see is touching the roof, and overall you do feel quite cocooned in the back. So if you're a taller passenger, that's just something to bear in mind. I guess that's a cost to having the beautiful upwards swooping window line, which really looks nice from the outside. But yes, it just makes it seem a bit tighter over here near my head, but otherwise very decent space in the back for the Tonale. As well as that, there's some good amenities here, so it's not a Spartan place to be for rear seat passengers. So you can see over here that we've got 2 map pockets on the rear seats. You've got air vents over here with a USB-C and USB-A connection as well to charge your phone, which is good. You've got some soft touch materials over here, which isn't too bad. It's a bit hard over here, but that's fine. You've got some bottle holders over here in either door. As well as that, you've got a rear center armrest with 2 cup holders here as well, which is good. So there's some decent amenities at the back. And if you fold that up and you do want to get someone into the middle seat, then it's not too bad. You do have a raised tunnel over here, but it's relatively low and wide. So at a stretch, you could maybe for a short trip, someone could keep their feet on that tunnel. So you could probably fit them in. All in all, quite a good effort by Alfa Romeo for the rear seat space of the Tonale. Opening the electric tailgate on the plug-in hybrid Alfa Romeo Tonale, if I can find the button, there it is. That opens up to reveal a boot of 385 litres. Now, importantly to note, the regular hybrid variants have a much bigger boot at 500 litres, so that is something to bear in mind if boot space is a key consideration for you. If you were to fold the rear seats down, which fold 60-40, that will reveal 1,430 litres of space all up. Now in terms of the amenities you've got in the rear, so you've got 2 lights over here, you've got some hooks there as well. You can lift this up over here, which conveniently locks into place like that so it doesn't fall down. Underneath here, you unfortunately don't have a spare wheel. You've instead got a tire puncture repair kit, but you do have a place to hold the charging cable that you can connect into a regular 240 volt home wall socket to charge the vehicle. Unlike the 2 lower grade Tonale models, which are powered by a 1.5 litre turbo petrol series parallel hybrid driving the front wheels, the plug-in hybrid electric is powered by a 1.3 litre pure internal combustion turbo petrol engine delivering 132 kilowatts and 270 newton meters, with a 6-speed torque converter automatic over the front axle, with the rear axle utilising a 90 kilowatt 250 newton meter electric motor. The front axle also has a 33 kilowatt electric motor, though that's mainly an inverter for the 15.5 kilowatt lithium manganese cobalt battery and designed to improve the engine's response through priming the 1.3 litres turbocharger. The axles can drive the Tonale in unison or by themselves, so either all, front or rear wheel drive. Total power outputs are 208 kilowatts, though it's unclear what the peak torque is. Claimed 0 to 100 km/h acceleration time for the Tonale plug-in hybrid is 6.2 seconds, which compares to 8.8 seconds for its 1.5 litre siblings. In performance testing today, we beat this claimed acceleration figure, achieving a best figure of 5.82 seconds. In braking performance, the Tonale PHEV also achieved a respectable 100 km to 0 stopping distance of 34.27 metres. Okay, so we have waited long enough. Alfa Romeos, they're all about the driving, right? So how does the Tonale plug-in hybrid electric drive? Well, my first impressions are actually really solid on our first Australian drive. Ultimately, there's a big variability to the way this vehicle drives, and that's inherent to its nature as a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle and the fact that it feels totally different depending on what mode you've got it in. So over here, you've got Alfa Romeo's mode selector. It's the DNA switch, which is familiar from vehicles like the Giulia and the Stelvio. And what you can essentially do is toggle between the modes to select dynamic mode, natural mode, or advanced efficiency mode. Now in advanced efficiency mode, which we are in right now, that is the full electric mode. So that now we are only using the electric motors. And by very nature of this being a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, that is a key mode for this car, because ultimately if you're diligent with keeping it up to 100% charge, as part of your daily commute to work, which you will hopefully be able to do within the 60 kilometers there and back, depending on how far away you work, that's what you'd want to be using to completely not use any petrol and to reduce your emissions. So how does it feel under this mode? Well, it feels just like an electric car, and by that I mean it's really quiet, it feels really refined, it's extremely smooth, and overall a really positive experience in that regard. I guess it's not a fully fledged EV, so it doesn't have that breakneck acceleration that you might find in other EVs by nature of the fact that you aren't using the half of its output, which is the petrol motor. But overall, it's got enough poke for those around town trips. It's a 60 kilometer claimed range, so if you are just using it around urban areas, it's got plenty of poke for you to be able to navigate city streets and the like in that regard. So overall, it's a really relaxed driving experience in EV mode. Now, it will stay in this EV mode in advanced efficiency for as long as you have range. So currently we've got 49 kilometers of range left, so it's gone down a bit, but essentially we will stay in EV mode until we get down to less than 1% electric range, and that is when the petrol motor will kick in. As well as that, there are two other moments that the petrol motor could kick in, and that is during an open throttle event. So essentially, if you floor the accelerator, the petrol motor will probably kick in. Not only that, but the electric motor is limited to travel at speeds of up to 135 kilometers an hour. So at that point, it will also kick into the petrol motor. And then we will of course switch back to natural mode. So that is the main hybrid mode that the vehicle uses, and in that moment, the vehicle is essentially transitioning between using the petrol motor or the electric motor or both. And that does change the driving experience slightly because you can hear a petrol engine. It's not whisper quiet like it is in the electric mode. And overall, that transition between the front and the rear axle, the petrol and the electric motor, overall, that's been quite smooth. Sometimes it's been imperceptible. Generally, it's always been done without fuss. There's perhaps maybe I had 2 occasions that I can remember where just by nature of the way that I inputted the throttle and the timing, there was a bit of a clunk that was definitely noticeable, but on the whole, that happened twice. So 99.9% of the time, it's generally been a pretty smooth experience in that regard. And that, I guess, brings us to the next element of the Tonale drive experience in terms of the ride and handling and the steering. And overall, that's one of the first things that I noticed when getting into the Tonale is the steering. It is really light. I don't mean that in negative. In fact, some people might think that that's a really good thing, and I think most people will really appreciate that. It is a very light and easy vehicle to steer. Not only is the steering really light, but it's really direct, it's responsive, it makes the car feel really darty, and overall the car has this feeling of feeling really light on its feet, which is pretty impressive considering it weighs quite a bit more than the hybrid variants. But overall, it feels really darty. So I think this light steering, particularly as a small SUV, will be appreciated by a lot of buyers because it's just really easy to pilot around town, really easy to pilot at low speeds and plant exactly where you need as well. If I'm nitpicking, and I guess it is an Alfa Romeo, probably it doesn't seem to have that much steering feel or feedback. So that is an area that if it had that would really elevate the drive experience. But overall, still pretty good. In terms of the ride and handling, I've already mentioned that the car feels quite light on its feet, and I think it does handle really quite well, at least on the roads that I've been driving over the few days that I've had the car. It feels extremely grippy. It seems like it's got really good body control, and it actually is a pleasure to kind of just push through a set of corners, but partly because it feels so light and agile on its feet. It feels like maybe it could even use more power than it has. So Alfa Romeo, perhaps there's a case for a QV variant sometime in the future. I'm not sure, but overall, the handling seems really good for the vehicle, coupled with the nice steering. In terms of the ride, on the scale, it's definitely on the firm side, but it's acceptable, to me at least. So if you're someone that's after a plush ride experience, then it's definitely worth test driving this vehicle to see if it's fine for you. But for me, totally acceptable, but definitely on the firm side, though it's not too jarring and not unlivable at all. It is worth noting that this vehicle is spec'd with those 20-inch wheels, as I mentioned, and it's the only Tonale I have driven, so I haven't actually driven one on the lower profile tyres. Aside from the ride and handling, the rest of the experience is pretty good. The transmission, overall, it did a pretty good job over my time with the vehicle. So it's a 6-speed automatic. Obviously, if you're in EV mode, it doesn't come into the equation. When you are in that hybrid mode, perhaps on occasion, it was maybe slightly indecisive at times, but overall it did a pretty good job. Maybe it could be great to have some more ratios, but it was acceptable for me. Apart from the transmission, perhaps the engine note could be a bit more inspiring, but I need to stop myself there because this is ultimately a small SUV review. It is not a Alfa Romeo sports car review at all, and ultimately for what it intends to do as a small SUV, this vehicle delivers a product that's really light and easy to steer and really comfortable to get in. So I think in that regard it does a really good job. That said, you can make things a bit spicier because we have talked about the two of the modes so far. So we talked about the natural mode and the advanced efficiency electric mode, but you can also put it into dynamic mode, so the sporty mode, and that essentially does a few things like holding the gears for longer, firming up the damping of the suspension and weighting up the steering to just deliver that sportier drive experience. And given that the car does feel quite good when you're driving at a bit of speed and putting it around some corners, so again, that mode elevates it if you're in that mood for that type of drive. But ultimately, this is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and that will be the least efficient mode because that is using a lot more of the petrol component of the motor. So again, that is something to bear in mind in terms of why you are buying this vehicle. And overall, I guess it comes down to what your value equation is as a buyer and what you're aiming to get out of a vehicle like this if you are buying it, given it does straddle that interesting middle ground between being fully electric and being a petrol car as well. Now for some of the all-important questions when buying a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and those are range and efficiency. So Alfa Romeo claims that this is their most efficient vehicle ever produced, and that may certainly be the case, but how efficient is it exactly? Well, there are some claimed figures first that we'll go through before we go through our results. Alfa Romeo claims a combined fuel efficiency figure of 1.5 litres per 100 kilometres. We don't have a combined fuel efficiency figure for the regular hybrid mode for this test, as we predominantly drove in the electric mode or the hybrid mode with the less fuel efficient eSave functionality switched on. But on our first drive of the car in Europe last year, Chasing Cars delivered a 4.2 litre per 100 kilometre consumption figure on a 100 kilometre test loop, which did include some twisty Italian alpine passes. This time, when in hybrid mode or natural mode as per the drive mode selector, with the eSave functionality switched on, which uses the petrol motor to maintain or increase battery charge, we delivered an average of 12.84 litres per 100 kilometres. eSave is a very thirsty mode on EVs, so this figure looks about right in this scenario. However, the use case of this mode is less likely in Australia, where the car will likely be driven mostly in full EV mode or standard hybrid mode without the eSave switched on. Most importantly, however, how did we go in terms of pure electric range? Alfa claims the vehicle can do 60.5 kilometres in electric mode, and in a continuous urban test loop of up to 70 kilometres an hour, we managed to drive exactly 60 kilometres on a single charge before the petrol engine kicked in. So Alfa's claimed 60.5 kilometre range is accurate. It is important to note, however, that there was a small discrepancy on the charging readout when we began our test. The digital instrument cluster noted 100% battery charge and charging complete, but at the same time, the media display screen showed 98% when we started our test. Nevertheless, we drove 60 kilometres. And based on the vehicle's 15.5 kilowatt hour battery, that's 25.8 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. In terms of its standard equipment, the Tonale plug-in hybrid also comes with a 7.4 kilowatt onboard AC charger and also a Type 2 charging port as well for public charging. Now, as well as using public chargers, you can also use the cable that comes with the car to connect it to a standard 240 volt home wall socket to charge the vehicle. Now, Alfa Romeo says that you can easily do that overnight to get the car from 0 to 100% charge. In my experience, on the first night, I had a few snags because I plugged the car into the wall socket, but unfortunately there was an issue detected with the charger, so it didn't actually charge. Now, that was related to a recall that Alfa Romeo had in November last year, which just required a quick software update. And credit to Alfa Romeo, I called them up the next morning, and within that day, within 1 hour of going to the mechanic where they squeezed me in that afternoon, it was a quick fix and the vehicle was ready to charge that next night. Plugging it into the wall, I was able to go from 0 to 100% charge in about 7.5 hours just using that standard wall socket. So again, given it is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, by nature of how it's used, if you are keeping up that charge every day, then you can continuously run it on that EV mode. You'll just have to be diligent with charging it at home, and you can easily do that overnight, as I've proven with my experience. Now, one frustration that I did have is when the charging cable was not working at home, I went to charge the vehicle at a public charger. Now, because the vehicle doesn't come with a Mode 3 Type 2 cable for a public charger, it meant that the first station I went to didn't actually have any cables that I could attach my vehicle to. It was a bring your own situation, so I couldn't use that one. Then I finally got to another station that was compatible close to my house, but unfortunately the cable there didn't stretch far enough because another car was using the relevant spot. So that meant that I couldn't charge the vehicle. So the lack of that type of cable in the car is a bit of a frustration. So what about running costs and service intervals for the Alfa Romeo Tonale plug-in hybrid? Well, the service intervals for the Tonale plug-in are every 15,000 kilometers or every 12 months. So over 5 years or 75,000 kilometers, that's going to cost you $3,100 to service. Interestingly, that's $575 less than the regular hybrid variant. Now, importantly, the Tonale plug-in hybrid takes 95 octane fuel, and in terms of warranty, it's covered by a 5-year unlimited kilometer warranty. It also comes with 5 years of roadside assistance. As well as that, the battery is covered by an 8-year, 160,000 kilometer warranty too. Has Alfa Romeo nailed the brief on its first ever plug-in hybrid electric vehicle? Well, for such a crucially important vehicle to get right for Alfa Romeo, I think they've done a pretty good job. Not only is it a really competent small SUV, but it's also their first step into electrification, and I'm really excited to follow that journey on just what the future holds for Alfa Romeo in terms of its electrification. Is it as exciting as perhaps a Giulia or a Stelvio? Perhaps not. There's some subjectivity in that regard, but it is very expensive, and ultimately it is a niche product. It's going to appeal to a select buyer, someone who not only wants a small SUV, someone who wants a small SUV with a bit of unique individual style that only an Alfa Romeo can offer, but also someone who wants to reduce their fuel consumption but isn't ready to go fully electric. And perhaps if that is a trifecta that this vehicle meets for your needs, then perhaps it is a good vehicle, but it will cost you. Ultimately, we're keen to see just how this vehicle performs for Alfa Romeo in Australia, and we're also keen to see what the future holds for Alfa in terms of electrification with their next SUV, a compact city SUV, the Milano, due for reveal in April as well. So those are just my thoughts on the Alfa Romeo Tonale Veloce Plug-in Hybrid Electric Q4. There you go, got it out in one go, but we'd love to hear what you have to think. Let us know if you would buy this car. We'd love to know. Let us know in the comment section down below. While you're there, make sure to hit like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.